Hello, my fellow knights and warriors. When I started this series, my idea was to talk more about Norman Saga, but like I said at the beginning of this series, I wanted to give some spotlight to the great old one, Cry Havoc, as well. So this is the first part of the cycle of videos about Cry Havoc itself. I'm going to make them along with videos about Norman Saga, and this is going to be some kind of introduction. And well, Cry Havoc started at 1981 when two wargamers who were focused on the miniatures wargame, Gary Chalk and Tony Webster, decided that they want to create their own wargame, which would be a board game, but it will be heavily influenced by miniatures games. They wanted to make their game easy, simple and fun to play. It was their primary goal. They had no plans of making a very accurate or historically detailed game. That wasn't their idea, and it worked very well. They created their own game, and Gary Chalk was a designer of graphics, while Webster was mostly focused on rules, and that's how they created Cry Havoc, which was published by Standard Games in 1981, and it became a very popular game because of a couple of reasons. First of all, the game was pretty nice. It had two geomorphic boards, one of the crossroads and one of the village, and very simple rules that can be learned very quickly. Couple of play sheets, couple of scenarios, some historical background, and what was one of the most significant and important pieces of the Cry Havoc, counters. Counters were very nicely made. They are even today making a very good impression. Each character has two, or when it comes to the mounted characters, even four counters, showing him in the various statuses and various stages of the battle: good health, wounded, stunned, mounted, dismounted. Each character, there are various characters. Some of them are knights, sergeants, crossbowmen, archers, militia, peasants. There are pack mules. So the game has a very narrative vibe, and the fact that each character has his own counter makes it quite unique even today. There weren't many tactical games that used such scale. Characters can be used in various scenarios, and of course people quickly found that they can create their own scenarios, their own boards, so the game became quite successful. And very soon enough another part of the family was created. It was a siege. Siege was focused on conquering a castle, a very typical piece of the medieval history, and it was the first game of this series that used graphics made by the well-known graphic designer who was Peter Dennis. Yeah, sorry, I had to check to make sure I'm not going to change his name. And this game came with one new board that pictured the entire medieval castle, which was loosely focused, based on the Skenford Castle in Wales. So players can finally play their own siege. A lot of people used Cry Havoc rules in their own miniatures games. They used even miniatures to play Cry Havoc games, because big hexes and the big counters allowed you to use miniatures on these boards. Family became quite successful, and soon new games were released. One of them was Outremer. Outremer was focused on crusades, and it brought a couple of new things. First of all, a new factors for movement that were a bit bigger than the original movement factor, and they became a canon in all the future games of the Cry Havoc. Also, it was the first game that came with campaign, because before you could only play skirmish battles, and now you could play campaign on the bigger strategic board. A thing that was used in the couple of later games, especially in the Norman saga. Of course, that was not all. We got new games that brought Cry Havoc in the different eras, like Samurai, that was used in medieval the setting and rules of Cry Havoc in the medieval Japan, or Vikings, that brought Cry Havoc rules into the 9th or 10th centuries. And Vikings are also quite important because they introduced ships. That's something that was never used in the before. The last part of the Cry Havoc family was a sub-series called Dark Blades, and their expansions Dragon Noir. These are fantasy-themed games that are used fantasy creatures, dragons, orcs, elves, and magic artifacts, and they are using also Cry Havoc rules, but they introduce a lot of their new own rules, like for example dungeon maps, like the one you can see here, and a lot of counters introducing orcs, dragons, and wizards, and many other fantasy creatures that can be used in your own games. And Dark Blades was the last piece of the original Cry Havoc family, because it ended soon after in the early 90s, like many other board war games that found their end at the end of the 80s or at the beginning of the 90s, where computer games started to take their place. But even so, Cry Havoc never died. It gained enough popularity to have a community of players that used Cry Havoc to create their own boards, counters, scenarios. There came 2 additional books of scenarios for the Cry Havoc only, and a lot of fan-made expansions. Of course, 20 years later, Historicon brought the series back to life again with their Norman saga, but that's the different kind of story I talked before, and today I'm focusing on the Cry Havoc mostly. Let's start with focusing on game components. Cry Havoc comes with 2 boards, the Village and the Crossroads, and there was one more double-sided board called Forests that was released separately, but it is a part of the original Cry Havoc game. At last, community considers so. And each board can be linked with other. Each one has 4 sides that can be identified by their numbers, and they are pretty important because the scenario often tells us that one player enters from the side 4, one player enters from the side 1, etc, etc. Most of the scenarios uses 2 boards, and they are linked from various directions, creating your battlefields. Some scenarios are played on the single boards as well. And now, each board depicts a certain area with, you can see here we have a village with a lot of buildings, some trees, scraps and slopes. And next we have counters. Each character might have 2 or 4 counters. It depends on the kind of character, because mounted characters have 4 counters, foot characters have 2 counters, and animals have 1 counter. So, let's start with mounted characters. Here we have Sir Clegane. Sir Clegane has 4 counters. First of them, shows him in his full strength on the one side and his riderless horse on the second one. As you can see, the graphics are not only very good, but they are also very easy to recognize. Even if you have this horse without rider, just by the graphic you can tell that it belongs to Sir Clegane. Next we have his second counter that shows him being wounded, and on the other side we have his horse being dead. And then we have two counters for his food version. One shows himself in his full strength, and the back shows him being stunned, and the second counter shows him being wounded, and the last, the back, shows him being dead. Food characters have only two counters. The first shows him on the full good health, and the back shows him being stunned. The second counter has the side that shows him being wounded, and the back shows him being dead. Animals have only one counter, one with good health and the other side that shows the animal dead. Each character has three factors. The one, which is pictured in the upper left corner, shows his attack strength. The other, red, shows his defense strength. If it is encircled, this means that character wears armor. Finally, in the lower left corner, we have characters' movement points. And mounted characters also have this black triangle. And now there is important thing I need to tell you about. Original Cry Havoc had different movement values. They were lower than the ones you can see here. For example, mounted warriors had 8 movement points, but since the Crusades expansions was made and these movement points were increased, people considered the version from Crusades as a canon, and all the next games were released with these higher movement allowance points. And now, as you can see, I am using Vassal module to show you the game, and even the Vassal module has these movement points increased to the original version. So some people might find it annoying and some people find it cool. Even if you want to create your own game from the graphics you will find in the internet, you will find that most of the graphics uses this updated version of the movement points. So the triangle wasn't used in original Cry Havoc, it was used later to show the front of the mounted warrior, but it is useful, and if you are going to use the counters or the maps from the Cry Havoc in your Norman Saga games, then you might like the fact that Vassal module comes with these pieces that are the part of the Norman Saga family later. So these are the parts of the original Cry Havoc. There is also a counter sheet, and of course the play sheet with all the tables that I'm going to use to show you how the stuff works. Like I said, this is not a very complicated game. It is very easy and straightforward, but I will make a couple of videos to show you how it works, so you will find the differences between Cry Havoc and the later games. You can already tell that characters have now this code in the lower right corner that tells us their nationality, their class, and their movement ability. And yes, it can be a trouble when you play a Cry Havoc scenario and you are using counters that, and you might find a problem to find which counter belongs to which side. Of course, each scenario comes with the detailed list of the characters, but if you are playing a game with Vassal module, like here, it is always a good idea to use label. You can, for example, make a label for each character. Let's say player 1. And now you can see that this counter belongs to player 1, which makes it very easy to recognize which character belongs to which side. So this is a very good thing when you play with Vassal module. So that's all when it comes to the introduction. If you will have any questions, comment, anything regarding Cry Havoc or Norman Saga, you are welcome to post them in my comments. So that's all, and I'm going to make more videos about Cry Havoc soon.